Hello, this is the sermon for St Christopher's Church in Leicester for July the 12th, 2020. Our passages for today are Psalm 66 and John chapter 12, verses 20 to 26. As per usual, if you haven't yet read them, pause the video, read them, and then press play. In athletics, it's fairly obvious what glorious success and complete failure look like, is it not? The runner who comes first in the race, who smashes the world record and receives the gold medal, is the one who receives the glory, right? Well, in a sense, yes, that is how it works, isn't it? The fastest runner is the one who receives the gold medal winning glory. When Usain Bolt broke his world records and on one occasion at least, with a bit of a gap between him and the next runner, we were impressed, even amazed. This is the fastest man in the world, almost certainly the fastest man in history. But let me tell you another story about running a race. I wish I could remember what this race was and when it was. I remember reading it in a book sometime, but I can't remember precise details, but I'll give you the broad strokes of it. As far as I'm aware, it's a true account of an early athletics race going back a few decades, in which all the runners had disabilities. And I say all the runners, but in fact there were just 2 runners competing that day. I think the race was middle distance, maybe 400 or 800 metres. And in this race, one of the runners was way out in front, destined to win easily. But realising that his opponent was struggling behind him, he actually stopped partway through the race and then went to help the other runner finish the race. He helped him across the finish line, the 2 runners crossing together. And upon seeing this, the commentator, either on the radio or the TV, said something like, "God, make me more like this guy," referring to the guy who'd helped the other one. Is that glorious? Well, no world records were broken in that race, and the times both runners recorded must have been just kind of as bare figures, very poor. But yes, of course, in a way it was glorious. The commentator who made the comment recognised that in the desire to help the other runner succeed and put his own interests to one side, there was glory to be had for that guy. He was glorified in the eyes of that commentator, and I guess in the eyes of anyone who witnessed, or at least most people who witnessed that race that day. Usain Bolt smashing world records makes us go, wow. A runner stopping to help another succeed at the expense of his own victory, or easy victory, makes us go, wow as well. Those are very different, but they both make us go wow. In a comparable way, the Bible shows us that God's glory can be seen in both spectacular ways and also in hidden ways. First of all, let's consider the glory of God in Psalm 66. In this psalm, the writer tells others to worship the true God, the God of Israel, based on the mighty, glorious things he has done. He tells the reader outright in verse 3, "Say to God, how awesome are your deeds." He points to God's miraculous power at work in history as a basis for worship. And a few verses later, he points to a particular event in Israel's history which shows God's power. Look at verses 5 to 6. "Come and see what God has done, how awesome his works on man's behalf. He turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the waters on foot. Come, let us rejoice in him." He is presumably referring to the Exodus here, when God miraculously parted the Red Sea so that the Israelites could be brought to safety. You see, you can look at those mighty acts of God and be amazed. Even most atheists if they could watch the parting of the Red Sea happen, you'd think they would change their mind and acknowledge that God is real and he is glorious in his power. It's easy for everyone, whether Christians or not, to acknowledge that if it really happened, such an act is a glorious, amazing, mighty act of the living God. So there are times when the glory of God is spectacular and plain to see. It makes us go, wow. It's a glory which is unmissable. But then look at John chapter 12. In this passage, some Greeks approach Philip, one of Jesus' disciples, because they want to speak to Jesus. Take note of that. These are Greeks. Jesus came to minister to the people of Israel, the Jews. Yes, occasionally in the Gospels he performs miracles for non-Jews also, but his ministry is primarily for the people of Israel and takes place in and around Israel. But now he's getting inquiries from Greeks. Greeks who have clearly heard of his fame. Could this therefore be the moment for Jesus to go international? Could this be his breakout moment when he becomes a household name, not just in Israel, but in Greece as well? And then who knows how far his fame could spread around the world? Could this be the moment his glory is recognised through the whole earth? Well, let's see. Let's see how Jesus responds. Verses 23 to 24. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. I tell you the truth. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. What Jesus is saying here is that it isn't the moment for him to speak to these Greeks. It's not the moment for him to go international like that. Instead, the time has come for him to go and die. Because he knows that through his sacrificial death, many will find life. That's what he's talking about when he speaks of a wheat seed falling to the ground and dying, and lots of seeds being born as a result. Jesus shuns worldly glory and goes to the cross. And yet, did you notice how he described going to the cross in verse 23? He says, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Take note of that. Jesus says that in the brutal death he is facing, he will be glorified. We don't talk about capital punishment that way, do we? We don't read of someone going to the electric chair or receiving lethal injection and think that it's glorious. How could such a thing be glorious? When we read in Psalm 66 of God parting the Red Sea, we totally get it. That obviously shows his glory. But Jesus' torture and crucifixion, can we say that's glorious? Well, that seems to be what Jesus says here, doesn't it? And we need to understand that God's glory is sometimes spectacular and sometimes it is, in a sense, hidden. In the parting of the Red Sea, it's spectacular. In the death of Jesus, it's hidden. Because in the death of Jesus, God's self-sacrificial love is seen by those who understand what's going on. And that is indeed glorious. And what that means is that God's glory is seen in spectacular ways that even the world might acknowledge, and also in hidden ways that the world wouldn't recognize as glorious. But we as Christians need to be seeking to see the glory of God, whether in spectacular or in hidden ways. God's glory is seen in the Gospels, when Jesus raises the dead, when he gives sight to the blind, when he feeds more than 5,000 people with just a few loaves and fish. And when the Red Sea is parted. And that spectacular glory is seen when God works miracles today by his Spirit. And at the same time, Jesus tells us elsewhere in the Gospels that a believer giving a cup of water to another believer is worthy of a reward, and is therefore an act in which the glory of God is seen. We also read that when 2 or 3 disciples get together, there he is with them. Up the road in Rome, the emperor might make big decisions from a flashy palace surrounded by soldiers. But when a few ex-fishermen, disciples of Jesus, get together, the creator of the universe is with them. These kinds of situations, which Jesus speaks of in other passages, might not outwardly look glorious to the world, but God is there, and therefore his glory is there. And so, God's glory, spectacular and hidden, is not the same. It's not the same as what the world always sees as glorious. If I could go through lockdown again, and I realise for us in Leicester it's not over yet, but if I could go through the whole thing again, then I think I'd want, no, not I think, I know I'd want to seek the glory of God more during it. What do I mean by that? Well, I think the mindset that I've fallen into, or have fallen into on occasions, is that during lockdown, if it isn't big and obvious, if it's not a big and obvious part of Christian ministry, then it's not something you really think about or invest in too much. In lockdown, I've been thinking about what's beyond, about ideas and plans for church-based Christian ministry. You know, the kind of ministry that goes on your church news sheet and often involves a number of church members getting organised and getting together. And because of that, I feel I've overlooked to some extent the opportunities to serve Jesus, the opportunities for Christian ministry at home. Lockdown ended up becoming more of a period to get through until church ministry could start again. Whereas in reality, ministry I should never have thought of as ever having stopped. And neither should any of us think that way when we think about our own lives, whether we're ordained or not. Because if God thinks even giving a fellow Christian a cup of water out of faith and love is worthy of reward, and therefore demonstrates his glory, then think of the many everyday things we might please God in and see his glory. God's glory can be seen in both spectacular and hidden. And all of us who are Christians are called to Christian ministry wherever we are and whatever our current status or situation. Because the glory of God can be both spectacular and hidden, each of us has the opportunity to see and experience it for ourselves day by day. To see God's glory as I interact with my children impatiently and carefully homeschooling them, or caring for them or playing with them. To see God's glory in compassionately serving my wife. To see God's glory in the dozens of phone calls or Zoom chats I've had. These have been or are good and right things to do. But I don't think I've come away from them with a greater sense of God's glory during lockdown. And that's something which is a regret to me. But we live and learn, and the Lord always picks us up. And I pray that from now on I seek God's glory day by day, whatever my circumstances, whether in the spectacular or in the hidden. So, if we are disciples of Jesus at all times, and if we are disciples of Jesus, then we are, then our homes can be the arena where we see the glory of God. We are the church, not the building. And so our streets can be the arena where we see the glory of God. Our phone conversations can be the arena where we see the glory of God. Because if the giving of a cup of water can bring reward and demonstrate God's glory, then surely a simple phone call to a Christian brother or sister which comes from a place of true faith and love can be also. So let's seek to see God's glory, rather than being slaves to the world's ideas about glory and success. Through the Spirit, may we be filled with the love and presence of Jesus, because in this is the glory of God. God's glory, spectacular and hidden. Let's pursue it. But let's make sure it's His glory we're pursuing, not our own glory or so-called success. Churches up and down the country now, with increasing freedom as we come out of lockdown, can jump headlong into renewed activity. Fill up the church calendars. Fill up the service rotas. But the question is this: does such busyness always help us to seek and experience the glory of God in either spectacular or hidden ways? That's what we need to be seeking. Let's seek to see His spectacular glory, absolutely, as we ask Him to do miraculous, incredible, amazing things, that we might see more Red Seas parted in our time. And let's seek to see His hidden glory as we see Him at work in unseen everyday actions, as we see the glory of Jesus' crucifixion in acts of humble, loving self-sacrifice, that by the Spirit's power we may become more and more like Him. Because the way of the world and the way of Jesus are not the same. Listen here to Jesus' words in John 12 verses 25 to 26. The man who loves his life will lose it, while the man who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honour the one who serves me. Day by day we must choose Jesus' glory over our own, that in eternity, and even in increasing measure now, we might bask in it forever and ever. Maybe take a moment to think about what you've heard and to pray.